Welcome to Leading with Artivism. Leading with Artivism is a live monthly interview series created and curated by Poet Gold in collaboration with Arts Mid-Hudson, featuring a diverse mix of artivists, artist activists who have taken up the charge through their art to highlight social issues. We invite you to ask questions and get an inside look at the hearts and minds of these courageous creatives.
Welcome, everyone, to another month of Leading with Artivism. Our guest today is Pamela Sneed. Pamela is an author of Sweet Dreams and Funeral Diva, which was featured in the New York Times and won the 2021 Lambda Lesbian Poetry Award. She is the recipient of a 2023 Creative Capital Grant in Literature. Welcome, Pamela. But what I want to do first, before we actually bring her to the front of the room, is put up one of my favorites of hers, Rapunzel.
Rapunzel was a sister. You think I'm playing? I said Rapunzel was a black woman better than your mama. That white woman with the blonde hair hanging out in the castle pining for Prince Charming was a damn fairy tale. Nah. The Rapunzel I knew had dreadlocks longer than the Geechee River. I'd say, Rapunzel, Rapunzel. She'd say, what you want now? I'd say, Rapunzel, let down your hair. And she would let those dreadlocks blonde from baking in the sun fall from beneath her red, black, and green cap so I could grab a hold of one and climb on up. Now, we all know that fairy tale girl's hair was too slippery to hold anybody. And anyway, Prince Charming should have left well enough alone because I found out. The woman that they said was a witch, keeping Rapunzel prisoner, was Rapunzel's lover. And that castle was the love they built. Yeah, Rapunzel was a free woman making her own choices, and she did not need any rescuing.
We bring Pamela up. Rapunzel. Rapunzel.
Oh my goodness.
What a twist on Grimes' fairy tale.
Right.
Welcome. Let me ask you a question about that, though, before we move on. What was the spark for you that sort of make you decide that you wanted to write a story about Rapunzel in this way, a spoken word poem on your journey?
I think I was just meeting a lot of it was probably the late 80s, early 90s, and I was meeting a lot of Black feminist women and lesbians, and I was getting introduced to the scene, and Hattie Gossett did a revision of King Kong. And I think that inspired me to kind of think about Rapunzel, and I was in one of my first lesbian relationships, and I was in school, and so that was it. Yeah, and so it was just kind of within a Black lesbian poetry scene, anything was possible. We were trying to kind of revise things to make a space for ourselves. And so, I was like a kid and I heard this stuff and I was like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you went down that path. So I consider you an art activist, because the more I read your work, I know that the AIDS epidemic really impacted your life. Funeral Diva is almost like someone said, a love letter to those lives that were lost. What made you decide that you wanted to tell those stories particularly?
Well, I think that that they were my friends, and that was really how I kind of came to voice. I mean, again, I was a young Black lesbian in New York, and I had moved from Boston to kind of discover myself, and I wanted to write. And then I met all of these Black gay men, and then they were almost we were all kind of coming to voice, and there was a scene and a community, and it was burgeoning, and it was amazing. It was sort of akin to the Harlem Renaissance, downtown New York, only this was late 80s, early 90s. And then everyone like, sort of died, so it was like,
Mhm.
we were like, we were encountering a war, and in our young lives, and so it was like rather devastating, and there was just a period that no one talked about it, and I was like, I never really moved on, I mean, these were
Mhm.
my friends, and you know I just was telling the stories of my life,
Right.
and the people that were important to me, and that there really wasn't any literature on it. And even when people did start to talk about the AIDS crisis, they only talked about like white men, and then it was only from the standpoint of men. And I was very defined by a lot of those poets, and so, yeah, it was kind of like, no, I didn't just move on. No, I didn't just forget. It was devastating to, my identity and my coming of age and everything. And so I always wanted to document those people. Yeah.
Yes, the it's sort of I mean, for those folks who weren't even living then, they're sort of having that experience with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
You say
Mm-hmm.
it sort of like runs parallel to that experience that we've experienced during the AIDS epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I follow you on social media, and I've noticed, and maybe you've already been in that space. I don't know, but I've noticed your transition to art, to
Mm-hmm.
the visual space, and exploring collages and self port. Am I safe to say that those are self portraits?
Yeah, like right now I'm doing a lot of the blues singers because I just did
Okay.
a big performance piece on Big Mama Thornton.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I mean it's funny because I've been painting her and I'll call her like the blues singer, but I look at the portraits and it looks like me and her. You know what
Okay.
I mean? It looks like a
Right.
mixture, so that somehow like the blues singer is becoming my avatar.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um and yeah, it's like it's not a transition per se, it's like
Okay.
an expansion.
Right.
And I think like I always collected, visual art. Like since I can ever remember, I was always friends with visual artists and stuff like that. And so I was always like, and I always like style and stuff like that. So visual art was always part of my life. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, I took like an art therapy class, and
Okay.
then I was like, oh yeah, this is it, you know what I mean? Like I need to do this as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started learning painting and drawing, so now yeah, so it's become part of my language. Yeah.
And I noticed when you said art therapy that your hashtag, and I was going to ask you about that. Some of your hashtags say art therapy,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, no, I have like a really phenomenal art therapist. And I finished my what was it? I did my MFA about 13 years ago.
Yeah.
And when I finished that program, I was like, "Oh, I want to start making things with my hands." And so I'm like a very instinctual person.
Mhm.
And so I mean, I think like that's like a lot of what art is following those instincts.
Right. Can we
Like
bring up?
honing them and then following them. So I started having the instinct to start making things with my hands. And then I had this really expensive like health insurance at the time, and
Mhm.
you could take any kind of therapy that you wanted, and they would pay for it. And it's funny because I'm like a therapy head, so I've been in it all my life. But I
Mhm.
was like, ooh, art therapy. And I was right. It just like opened up a door.
Hmm.
And then it was funny because I had a friend who was an artist and like a visual artist, and they were like, "You were repressed." And I was like, it was hard for me to believe I was repressed, but I guess so. And then I've been singing, and like all these like, I mean, it's kind of fun. So now I'm like, moving into music, and the piece that I did on Big Mama Thornton just recently was an all music show with a band and everything. And I
Mhm.
mean,
Nice.
I wrote the story, but people were kind of gasping because they, they figure they knew who I was, and I'm just like, and like a really like a veteran, a famous veteran artist was there, and they were like, Pamela, it's just astonishing,
Hmm.
the way that you're like moving between these forms, and that you
Right,
would just
right.
like completely take on new modes of expression.
I
And
think that
so
I think that if we, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think that if we, as artists, if we don't put ourselves in these boxes, we can allow ourselves to become a multidisciplinary artist, to try new things, to see how we feel about them. I want to bring up one of your pieces that I snatched off of Instagram, and we can talk about that for a little bit. Christian or Kate? Yes. So talk to us about this piece here.
Well, this is the blues singer. I was looking at like Big Mama Thornton. I was looking at an image of her and I was painting her. But also there was this text that was coming up like somehow like through the singing, like there was a lot of healing that was happening. Like, every single medium like works with your body in a different way. And so like something that I couldn't maybe access in language, I was experiencing like in my body and performance through singing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, so this is like Big Mama Thornton, kind of like an abstract, and it says, something like I was always the runaway slave, kept separate, the one that everyone would fear. I was also the one who, when freedom came, stayed behind, helped others, couldn't imagine freedom for myself. So imagine my surprise when the fear that had held me captive all of my life began to dissipate. And yeah, so it was like this moment that I was like feeling, because I think, I experienced a lot of like, I've always been a performer, but I also always had like a lot of fear.
Okay.
And I've had to work through, my fears and conquering my fears and everything. And I really felt like in doing this music piece that I had like really conquered a lot of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like really beautiful, to have this realization that, yeah, I was always the one who was enabling others, like I teach, so I'm like, run, be free,
Right,
do all
right,
this stuff. And then realizing that like somehow I wasn't even imagining freedom for myself. You know what I mean? Like I was like one of
yes,
those slaves who was like, okay, well, I've seen too much. You go ahead. You know what I mean?
right, right. The
And
coach in
that was,
you, the coach in you was coaching others, but
yeah.
was not inner coaching yourself. There's another piece I want to bring up. It's a collage piece, I believe, where you make reference to Harriet Tubman. I see the image of
Yeah.
Harriet Tubman in that.
Yeah. She's like a spirit guide. And, I mean, people like, she's like every single one of my works, all my visual show, all my writing, like I always reference Harriet Tubman,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in there. My first book was Imagine Being More Afraid of Freedom Than Slavery. And
Mm.
so I was drawing a lot of parallels to my own like therapeutic journey to Harriet Tubman on the Underground Railroad. And actually, that book is being reissued this year by Fordham University Press, and it's supposed to stay in print forever as a lesbian classic.
Wow,
So
nice.
yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you. So I'm real excited. So Harriet, so I mean, she always appears in my visual shows. She always has a place in my writing. Um, yeah, so I always like harken back to her, and like, people will say, "Oh, you are Tubman," or like once I had a fight with like not a fight, but like I was arguing with a student, and I said to them, "Oh, I feel like, Harriet Tubman and I've lost a passenger." And she started to laugh. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So it's
yes,
like
yes,
I
yes.
always think of like my journey as
Mhm.
like, as one where I'm like leading people, from
Mm. Yeah,
captivity to, freedom,
right.
so there are parallels, and so yeah, so I have a deep commitment to, my leadership and all of that. And I guess that is, my activism, like
We have
always, yeah.
we have a question from one of your followers. What life experience influenced your art?
I mean,
Hmm.
everything. I mean, even that piece that you pulled up, it's like from being at Cape Coast Castle in Ghana and
Hmm.
seeing basically the slave forts, and
Right.
like in all the rooms and the dungeons and and how they kept the rebels like separate. And I was like, oh, I would always, I would be like one of those. I would be in the separate room, you know,
Right.
because
Right.
they were afraid that they would like infect, I hate that language, but they would
Mhm.
infect the general population,
Mm.
really
Mhm.
they would inspire the general population to, fight back.
Right. Right. Right.
So,
Freedom.
so anyway, so yeah, like always my life experiences, make their way into my art. So it's like, now I'm doing stuff on the blues singer, and I just did a huge performance about, the blues singers, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's just kind of like I'm always kind of like cross pollinating.
Hmm.
um and then, I also like, I mean, in terms of my family situation, I mean, I come from like a lot of repression and a lot of abuse and, stuff like that. And so, writing, art, music, teaching, like all those things saved me.
Right.
you know.
Right. I often tell people that the arts is a good platform to be able to work out some of the issues that one you may be afraid to face, and that you can explore it safely through your art. We have a
Yeah.
question from someone who's watching. He says, a lot of my poetry is very political and might be offensive to some, but I have had good reactions from audience. So my question is, how can I market my work without selling myself short?
Well, I mean, it's a complicated question. I
Mhm.
mean, uh, I don't know about these people who are like offended by that, like that's, I mean, basically, I mean, interestingly enough, like now, I'm many decades old, and it's like, I guess I built a brand, through political art, right?
Right.
And like now I'm starting to see the rewards of it. Whereas for a long time I was outside of the system. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? And like people didn't know what I did. Oh, she's a poet. Oh, she's a
Right.
performer. Oh, she's this. And like, I don't know, like everybody was feeling some kind of way, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And it's just now that like through years and years and years of work that finally I'm starting to see a lot of the rewards of it. Like I'm starting to like, make money and have like, like different offers and, more respect around what I do. So sometimes, I mean, the truth of the matter is you have to just do what you need to do for yourself. You know what I mean? And forget about, um, what people say if it's disparaging, you know what I'm saying? I mean, if there's something in it that you need to hear, then by all means, like respond to it. But I mean, you have to make the work that's true to your soul, you know what I
Right.
mean? And when you market it, that's what you're marketing. This is my work, this is who I am, and this is what I have to say, you
Right.
know, and to, I mean, it's really like corny, but when I was like, I had a music teacher, and he's a young man, Stacy, and he works with Bill T. Jones. But in the middle of like teaching me music, he would just like stop and he'd be like, believe in yourself. And I was like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? I thought it was, you know what I'm saying? But there was something like real, he works with young people too, which was like,
Hmm.
it's funny, so but like something so like mundane is so true, like,
Absolutely.
and so I find myself now just like saying that, repeating that to my students,
Right. Right.
believe in yourself, and it's
Right.
like it's
And
fundamental,
when you're younger, it's hard to conceptualize that, it's hard to be like,
Mhm.
oh, believe in myself. I do believe in myself, but maybe your behavior is opposite to what
Right,
that statement is. But as you grow, you really begin to understand what that is, how to begin to fill your own shoes,
right,
and not trying to walk in someone else's shoes or someone else's version of what you should be,
right,
you know.
right. And it's just kind of like, some people, maybe they're going to get the rewards, right away. And then like, some of us are going to get that Mandela walk, you know what I mean?
Right.
And like,
I love that.
so, you're going to get that 27 years, like just like hard labor, you know what I'm saying? Before you see the victory. And I
Right.
worry that this generation hasn't really been prepared for that kind of work, because everything's instant, 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 instant. So, I mean, if people catch on like really early and give you a lot of support, then that's great. But like, and I mean, I run into people and they're like, it's almost like pity. Like they're like, are you still writing? Are you still like performing? And I'm like, what are you
Right.
talking about? Of course I am. You know what
Right.
I mean? But
Right.
they like, I don't know, they got their own thing on it. You know what I'm saying? But I'm like, yeah, I just finished a show at Park Avenue Armory. Yeah, I've got 2 books coming out. What are you talking about? But
Yeah.
I guess, yeah,
No,
I guess
I
people
think
need to
I didn't
give
mean to
up.
cut you off, but I think with that is, sometimes I believe that going back to what you're saying, that people don't have long-term vision.
Yeah.
They may lack the long-term vision. So to meet someone who is doing, like someone said to me recently at a show, wow, you've been doing this for a long time.
Right, right, right.
You
Right.
know,
I mean, what else would I be
right?
doing? This
This
is
is,
what I
I love what
do.
I do. This is
Yeah,
what I do,
right.
until I do something else. But so oftentimes we're in that space of we have to change, we have to change, we have to change. We can change in
Yeah.
the space in which we're in. You're in the arts, you're exploring music, you're exploring visual arts. You may have began as the poet, but now your story has expanded on how you convey the poetry, how you tell the story. And it's hard sometimes for
Exactly.
people to let that happen.
Yeah, I wrote an essay called "It's All Poetry to Me."
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you could tell your younger self um, 2 things about being a creative person in the arts, what would that be?
Mm, you're beautiful and you're brave and you're gonna make it.
Excellent. You're beautiful, you're brave, and you're gonna make it. I see your virtual background. What does it say? I know it says funeral
Oh,
diva, but I think it says something else too, doesn't it?
yeah, it's by another poet that I mentored, Tommy Pico, who actually
Mhm.
writes for reservation dogs. And I was the first person to like choose them for, for a ticket for a particular program. And so it was the first chance that they ever had as a writer. And they've just like
Mm.
ascended through the ranks and like they write for reservation dogs and they're like getting all this like accolades. And yeah, they're a Native American writer. And I looked at their application. I was like, you know what? I want to be in that number. What this kid is doing is like important, and I want to mentor them. So I'm
Beautiful.
like really excited that I had that vision. And
Mhm.
so Tommy Pico wrote Funeral Diva about, my book. Funeral Diva is deft, defying, devastating. So,
Death defying, devastating. Indeed,
mhm.
indeed. People should pick up Funeral Diva, pick up Pamela's book. Okay, you won't be disappointed. And Pamela, I want to thank you also for participating in this year, our 6-year Poetry Fest. Actually got you to come to Poughkeepsie, New York. you,
Yeah.
were like, you were like, is there a train going back?
Yeah,
What was
I
it?
didn't know where I was going. I mean, I've been to Poughkeepsie like a long time ago, but
Mhm.
I've been running around a lot, so it's like, I have a life like here in New York, but I also have like a life on the road, I'm always like
Yes.
moving around, like
Mhm.
going to present here and there. And so, yeah. So, yeah.
What was the experience like for you for Poetry Fest?
I had a brilliant time. I had a really beautiful time. I loved the audience. There were a lot of young people. And it's like, I mean, there was a mixture.
Hmm.
And I felt, people were really responsive to the word and I don't know, made me feel like what I was doing was important. And I don't know. So it was enriching, you know. It was an enriching conversation.
Yes, and they truly. I'm still getting messages on
Oh,
how you impact their lives, and so thank you. Thank you for that. Do you have a moment before we go, maybe to read a couple of minutes, for us, something from the book?
I don't have my book in front
You
of
have
me,
the
but
book?
oh my goodness. I didn't know. Well,
I didn't know either. See, we're very spontaneous here.
all right. Let me see. Um,
Just a snippet, just a.
well, here, I'm going to read this poem
Okay.
that I just wrote, and that's I mean, I didn't just write it, but okay. But anyway, it's for Tyree Nichols.
Hmm.
Watch or don't watch the video of Tyree Nichols' murder by black police. I laugh as if there's really a choice. We've been watching 400 years, live history, documentary film from the Mississippi to the Seine, ports of Lisbon, Portugal, Leeds, Benin, Ouida, Gori, the Nile, and beyond. We've watched blasted bone, bits of girl, glass shards left inside, bodies turned to stumps, smoke pits, fire hoses, animal teeth tearing into flesh, red water acid, separate bathrooms, fountains, schools, sundown towns, skin buried alive. I get it. To say I won't watch is a protest, a veil between life and death, line between the civil and brutality, a thin piece of cloth covering extremities. Watching is Nagasaki, watching is Hiroshima, a naked child, gray street, screaming skin, burnt off, running.
Hmm. Hmm. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for sharing it here with Leading with Artivism. Thank you for coming to Poetry Fest. I appreciate you. Thank you for visiting our kids through Alice Austin House. Thank you. So, ladies and
Thank
gentlemen,
you.
no problem. That's Pamela Sneed. Follow her on Instagram. Thank you for tuning in to Leading with Artivism. Next month in May, we shall have Drew Andrews, founder of CCE out of Kingston, New York. So until then, I'm your host, Poet Gold. Thank you, Art Mid-Hudson. Christian's with us today, and so is Kate. Thank you for handling it backstage for me today. Good night, everyone.
Good night.